one important aspect of chess is the opening phase, and picking openings that are, sort of suit your own style of play. There are thousands of different chess openings out there. You can find books or DVDs about different openings, but how do you know which one is necessarily for you? And here we're going to go through a game of Sergei Karjakin when he was again just 10 years old, and he played the Najdorf Sicilian. And as we can see now, in his early 20s as a world-class chess player, we can see that even then he knew what kind of style he was like and what suited him. And the reason why the Najdorf Sicilian suited Karjakin is because of the way he plays. He plays very, very attacking chess, very tactical chess, and the Najdorf is exactly one of those types of openings that suits him. So we're going to see a game he played against Dmitry Kononenko in the under-12 Ukrainian Championships, even though he was just 10 years old. And the reason why I like this game is because the way that he played against someone who actually is also a 2600 rated player now, Grandmaster Kononenko. So he also was a very talented player, clearly. And the game was of a very high level. We see Karjakin play the Najdorf, but he also showed he understand the ideas behind the opening, rather than just playing kind of what we say book moves, which you can just learn by reading or being shown in 5 minutes by another coach. He understands exactly where he should put his pieces, which side of the board he should be playing on, and he finished off with a very nice tactic. So let's have a look at how he manages to do that. So e4, c5, the Sicilian defence. The point, of course, of the Sicilian is to prevent white from playing d4, because black would like to exchange us off with a wing pawn. And the Sicilian is known as one of the most imbalancing openings around. From move 1, black plays this idea to try and swap off a side pawn for a white centre pawn. And it really suits people who like to play for a win as black, and this is certainly the case for Sergei here. Kononenko, of course, demonstrating his opening knowledge by playing the open Sicilian. So we just talked about how white wouldn't really want to exchange off that centre pawn for a side pawn, but here it allows white this excellent knight on d4, and that's the hallmark of the open Sicilian as white. So knight f6, knight c3, and the Najdorf Sicilian characterised by a6. So why play a6? Well, the important part to remember is that black is actually going to play this e5 move to kick the knight away on d4. But at the moment that's got a bit of a dodgy reputation, because white can now play bishop b5 check. And black's got a problem, because if black decides to play bishop d7, white can exchange and now put this knight on a lovely square on f5. And we see the knight really hammer on that pawn. But more importantly, this square on d5 becomes an outpost, and black would really miss having that light squared bishop on c8. So black doesn't really want to have that kind of variation played in this position. This is meant to be just clearly better for white. So instead you play a6, and that controls the b5 square. So now black is ready to play e5 and kick that knight away, and not fearing a potential check on b5 like this. So I hope that makes sense as to explain why a6 is played rather than the immediate e5. So white played bishop e2. There are, of course, many different variations that white can play. This one's known as the kind of classical variation, because white says, okay, you can do your plan, but I'm just going to castle sensibly on the king side and just develop my pieces sensibly as well. So Karjakin played e5, and this is the main move of the Najdorf, because black could have limited himself to just e6, and that's a kind of Scheveningen pawn structure. But here e5 attacks the knight on d4, and we're not too worried about this square on d5 just yet, because as I said, black has this this light squared bishop on c8, and that can come to e6, as you're going to see in just a moment. So the knight retreated, and both sides castle. So of course, sticking to the opening principles. So what can we say about this position? Well, it looks, I think it's too early to say probably. Those who play the Najdorf will already know what the plans are. But black is simply going to play bishop e6, knight to d7, and attempt to try and attack on the queen side. Possibly hoping at some moment to play d5, which would be the kind of freeing pawn break to try and open up the position. So that explains why white played rook e1, just keeping an eye down towards this e pawn. So bishop e6, And both sides just develop. Now, knight d2 was one of those moves where it's not really clear where he's trying to go with that. The point is that the white knight on d2 would like to get to that outpost on d5, which we spoke about just a few moments ago. So the route he's decided is to try and play knight f1 to e3 and then go to d5 in this manner. But it's going to be quite time consuming. And in the meantime, we're going to see Sergei really build up some head of steam on the queen side. So he decided, well, if you're going to play the retreating move like that, let's go with our plan with b5, the typical Najdorf move. Knight f1 and knight b6. You might have probably considered why black didn't originally play the knight to c6, and I think here we see exactly why. Because if black now plays the typical Najdorf move as Sergei did, like this, the knight controls some very nice squares and possibly even a4. Whereas on c6, I don't think it would have been that effective in controlling the d5 square. So his pieces all fit in very well together, and again shows that he has really studied this opening and really understood the ideas behind the Sicilian Najdorf that he plays. So bishop g5, and you're allowed to move a piece more than once, of course, once you've developed your pieces. And the idea was his knight e3 to d5. So Karjakin played a very nice move, b4. And that was an excellent move because Karjakin realises that white is unable to play knight d5 because black has a number of pieces protecting that square. We see the knight, the bishop, and the other knight protecting the key d5 square. However, Kononenko realises if he doesn't go knight d5, what will he do with his knight? Because he cannot play knight a4. Knight b1 would be one of those, well, that's not a very scary move, is it? And it would drop the e-pawn, because black has this already knight possibility on e4. So probably white has gone a little bit wrong already, it's possible to say, because he hasn't really kept control of the d4, the d5 and the e4 squares. So here we see probably black has an advantage. Now, the reason why I like this game is in a few moves you're going to see, again, a very mature move, or sort of plan by Karjakin. Because when white went knight d5, he took, and he could simply have just taken on d5, and it's unclear as to why he didn't, but I think this shows the maturity about his play, because even as a 10-year-old, normally young players tend to just take whatever's on offer. But I felt he was maybe a little bit sort of worried about ideas like, like bishop to f3. And although he can take the bishop on g5, I think what he was worried about is white getting control of this d5 square. So it's clear he really understands the idea behind this opening, behind the Najdorf Sicilian. Don't let white control that d5 square if you can, because then it would allow white to stabilise the position in the centre. And I think even though black is a pawn up with a good position, Karjakin felt, do you know what, I think I can do a bit better than this. So he decided, if we go back to the position after e takes d5, he decided, I'm just going to move my bishop to f5. And instead, white cannot use this d5 square for a knight. We notice that the knight on f1 is unable now to come to this square because his own pawn is standing on that square. And black has some unpleasant pressure down on the c file. So probably already black is a little bit better. So very mature play there by Karjakin. Bishop d2, a5. And here we see this kind of manoeuvring around. So black is not the pawn up that he could have been, but instead he decided that which side of the board to play on. And I think Karjakin just basically felt he was better in this position because his pieces are better placed. If you look at white's pieces in the centre, they're all a bit blocked in, whereas his pieces have a lot more scope. If you see how rook c8 would attack down towards c2, so it's very difficult to see what white's plan is. Whereas black, on the other hand, has many plans. He can play rook c8, and he can also play for this really quite attacking idea, which he does in the game, which is f5. Now, that would be a similar pawn break, trying to release the rook on f8. The idea is, white has no central control, so we should come forward and try and attack. And that is exactly what happened. So he played e4, not the most obvious move, but what's happening is this f5, f4 advance is now going to come with real power. It's really going to disrupt white's position. And he's even doing it by allowing white to capture a pawn on b4. Very risky play, but very dynamic play, which is a hallmark of Karjakin's style. So white played bishop h5. Now, it's hard to understand really why he didn't just capture on b4 like this. And the computer even agrees. But I think after f5, maybe Kononenko as white was a bit concerned that this f-pawn was coming towards f4, possibly towards f3, with a bit of action down on the king side. So I think white should have done that, but he decided, in a real practical game, that would be a bit difficult to defend against. So he played bishop h5. And now we see Karjakin keep the pawn on the queen side. And now this pawn, although it's a little bit weak, he's not bothered about that. Because as we said, he's really intent on this kingside action with f5, f4. And we're going to see that happen now quite soon. So white now played queen g4. Well, that prevents this f5 move. But what it allows is black to get the bishop in the game with bishop f6. So now both sides go on this manoeuvring phase. But we are going to see black stick to that plan of going f5. And it comes with great effect later. Bishop c3. Rook e8, simply defending the pawn on e4. And both sides, actually, if you look at white's position, he's done well to get this far with his major pieces being on fairly active squares. But I think white is really kind of a bit planless in this position because he has no real pawn breaks. He cannot really play b4 or c4. He certainly doesn't really want to consider moves like h4. So we see white kind of shuffling around and not really achieving anything. And I think Karjakin realised that and thought, well, I've got all the time in the world to just do what I want to do. And we're going to see that happen now. So rook b8. White fiddles around a bit. Rook e8. Again, it feels as though Karjakin also isn't doing much. But we are going to see the f5 advance quite soon. Queen moves, and here we go now. Black gets an f5. This was the point of all of black's preceding play. And how does white stop this simple pawn march? It's going to be very difficult for him. g3, well, that does stop it for one move. But now we see g5 occur. And this is not reckless by Karjakin because his king is actually very, very safe. He's got the pawn in front of the king. And his major pieces are also in very good central squares to try and defend against any potential white attack. So it's a kind of game of tennis now. White defends the f4 square. Black attacks it, threatening f4 yet again. White defends it again. And now comes a move of great maturity. I'm pretty sure a lot of people would play something like rook to f8, just renewing that threat of f4. But Karjakin played a very strange move, or it appears strange, but I think this again shows the power of his chess knowledge, even at 10 years old. He played king f7. Not really clear as to why he did that, but I think he's already looking towards the endgame, and he sees that the king coming in one step further will be very important for him. So after b3, white had to try something. He now spotted another sort of tactical idea. Where is the best square for my knight? And he decided the best square was to go to c5. How can he do that? He can do this maneuver. So very well played by Karjakin. And once he gets his knight to c5, here it's going to be very difficult for white to break through black's position. He has a very solid position, and black has all the trumps with f4 and potentially e3 to try and really go through white's position. So queen e3, rook e7, and instead of knight c5, maybe he spotted the e5 square. Why do you think he would like to do that? Well, if he gets to go there are some pretty juicy squares all the way down here for him to attack. So again, he's being very flexible with his plans here. Rook a7, here comes the knight. So white has done very well to even manage to get to this position, but I think in this position white is already lost because his knight is very poorly placed compared to black's knight, and he just has too many weak squares. So after rook d1, here we see the knight coming in, and I think the game is almost already over. king to everyone. There's a nice finish with king h1. And this brings up one of those checkmating patterns we see with the knight on f3 and a king on h1. And that is to bring one of your major pieces in towards the h2 square. So black would go queen h6 in. I think it's very difficult for white to defend against that. Only move is h4. And black simply moves the queen like this. And next move, he's going to crash through white's position. Very simple play. So, in the game, Kononenko played king f1, but then knight takes h2. Black has already netted a pawn, and now the rook comes in with devastating effect, like this. There are many ways to play the position, but in fact Karjakin decided he would just go for an endgame, a winning endgame, like this. And he just swapped all of his pieces off, forcing white to do something about the rook on d2. Of course, white had to capture, and now he could just swap off queens like this. Here we see Karjakin just slowly bringing the pieces in, only move knight e1, and now he swapped off everything. Can you see what black should do next? Quite an important move. Capture. And here white resigned, because black is 2 pawns up, and he has a winning endgame. So what can we say about that game? Well, it was very impressive how Karjakin knew his opening, he knew the plans, but he was very flexible in his plans. He didn't stick to one side of the board, the queen side, king side, or the centre. He clearly evaluated every move of his opponents, where he was going to play, and he decided to go through the centre. So, a very impressive game by Karjakin, and you'll be seeing a lot more of that in this DVD.